Okay, good morning. Today we're going to be covering one of the stories inside the Decameron. And our story from today is from Giovanni Boccaccio, and it's called Federigo's Falcon. Okay? So let's go to 159 to the background. My volunteers start reading. I'll read the background and then I have a volunteer to begin. Okay? I'll go with Mabellion. In 1348, bubonic plague swept Europe, killing more than half the population of Florence, including Boccaccio's parents. That date, 1348, of the plague, very important. And who were some of the people killed? Boccaccio's parents. Half of the population was killed. The Decameron begins with a group of 10 aristocrats, 7 women, and 3 men, taking up a residence on a country estate where they hope to wait out the plague in Florence. Basically what they're doing is going into quarantine while the plague is gone. To entertain themselves, each of them tell one story a day for 10 days. The name Decameron means 10 days. Each day they elect a king or a queen to preside over the day's storytelling and suggest the theme of the stories. Federigo's Falcon is told on the 5th day. Federigo's Falcon is told on the 5th day. So if you have 10 people, 3 males and 7 females, everyone is going to tell a story each day. That means how many stories per day? How many stories per day? 1. If there's 10 people. 10 people, each are going to tell a story a day. 10 stories per day. How many days the Decameron lasted? Is the length of the Decameron 10 days? 10 times 10, how much? 100. So how many stories is the Decameron composed? 100. So that Decameron, if you get it and you open it right now, you're gonna see basically 1,000 something pages long. So very extensive work. Natalia, begin.
Once Philomena had finished, the queen, finding that there was no one left to speak apart from herself, smiled cheerfully and said, "It is now my turn to address you."
Who's the one speaking now?
The queen.
The queen, yeah, because Philomena is done, she's over speaking. They're going to give you a brief background of that place where they are telling the quarantine and all of that, and then we're going to begin with the story. Go ahead.
And I shall gladly do so, dearest ladies, with a story similar in some respects to the one we have just heard. This I have chosen, not only to acquaint you with the power of your beauty over men of noble spirit, but so that you may learn to choose for yourselves whenever necessary.
Basically, the story that we're about to read is going to speak about noble men, about the good character of men. Therefore, that's for the 7 females are inside that place. So when they have to make a decision whether to be with a man or marry that man, they make a wise decision. Okay? Go ahead.
The persons on whom to bestow your largesse, instead of always leaving these matters to be decided for you by fortune, who, as it happens, nearly always scatters her gifts with more abundance than discretion. You are to know then that Cobo di Borghese Domenici, who once used to live in our city and possibly lives there still, one of the most highly respected men of our century, a person worthy of eternal fame, who achieved his position of preeminence by dint of his character and abilities rather than by his noble lineage. Frequently took pleasure during his declining years in discussing incidents from the past with his neighbors and other folk.
So this guy, this couple, Dominici, is a guy that is well respected. However, as the guy is getting older, he's starting to gossip the things that happen with his neighbors. Okay? Go ahead.
In this pastime he excelled all others, for he was more coherent, possessed a superior memory, and spoke with greater eloquence. He had a fine repertoire, including a tale he frequently told concerning a young Florentine called Federigo, the son of Messer Filippo Alberigi, who for his deeds of chivalry and courtly manners was more highly spoken of than any other squire in
Tuscany.
Our
story is going to be about Federigo.
In the matter of most young men of gentle breeding, Federigo lost his heart to a noble lady, whose name was Giovanna, and who in her time was considered one of the loveliest and most adorable women to be found in Florence.
So right now it's telling you, now we're going to begin the story, that our main character is a guy named Federigo. And this guy is going to lose his heart. Someone is going to break his heart. And that person is a woman called Mona Giovanna. So the guy fell in love with Mona Giovanna, and apparently Mona Giovanna is going to break his heart. By the way, it's very important for you guys to know that Federigo's Falcon, it's known as one of the most important and one of the greatest love stories ever. You will come by your own terms to that conclusion at the end. Okay? What happens with this Mona Giovanna? She's what? One of the most loveliest and adorable women to be found in Florence. Go ahead.
And with the object of winning her love, he rode at the ring tilted, gave sumptuous banquets, and distributed a large number of gifts, spending money without a restraint whatsoever.
Okay, what does Federigo do to try to get the love of Mona Giovanna? He threw what? Threw banquets, sent her gifts, spent a lot of money. Last year you read a novel about a guy that spent money, threw parties. Who was that guy?
Yeah,
a guy named Jay Gatsby. Remember that the purpose of Jay Gatsby was to throw his parties and have everything with wealth and all of that, so that in the hope of Daisy, that one day Daisy will come to one of his parties. Okay? Very similar to what is happening to Federigo. So if you want to use Great Gatsby as reference, you can do so. At least for the part that we're reading right now. Go ahead.
But since she was no less chaste than she was fair, the lady took no notice, either of the feelings that were done in her honor or of the person who did them.
This woman is not going to care all of the things that Federigo is going to do, not from the person that it comes, in this case Federigo. She's not going to fall for Federigo. She's not going to fall for Federigo. That's why at the beginning we said that this guy had his heart broken, because this woman will not look at Federigo. Go ahead.
In this way, spending far more than he could afford and deriving no profit in return, Federigo lost his entire fortune and reduced himself to poverty. being left with nothing other than a tiny little farm, which produced an income of just sufficient for him to live very frugally, and one falcon of the finest breed in the whole world.
This guy's gonna be left entirely poor. He spent everything trying to get Mona Giovanna to fall in love with him. When he gets poor, he's left with two things. Number one, with a farm. And the only thing of wealth that this guy is going to have will be his falcon. So he's going to be left with a farm and a falcon. The falcon is one of the greatest birds around. So this guy had a great bird. So basically, the only thing that he had, and you're gonna see the guy with the bird in 160, page 160. That's the only thing that he's gonna be having of value. The falcon. Go ahead.
But in this way, spending far more than he could afford and deriving no profit in return, Federigo lost his entire fortune.
No, since he was deeply in love.
Since he was deeply in love as ever and felt unable to go on living the sort of life in Florence to which he aspired, he moved out to Campi, where his little farm happened to be situated. Having settled in the country, he went hunting as often as possible with his falcon, and without seeking assistance from anyone. He patiently resigned himself to a life of poverty.
So the guy he's not going around, going to his friends, hey, can I borrow money? Can you help me? The guy just, you know what? I know that I'm poor. I know that I'm not going to be back to the way that I was. Well, there's nothing else to do. I'll continue hunting with my little falcon. So he resigned himself to the fact that he will continue being poor. Okay, go ahead.
Now one day, while Federigo was living in these straitened circumstances, the husband of Mona Giovanna happened to fall ill, and realizing that he was about to die, he drew up his will.
Number one, the husband of Mona Giovanna is about to die, and the guy is going to write a will. However, look at Federigo. The guy is throwing parties, sending gifts to a woman that is married. So now we know that Mona Giovanna was married. Okay, go ahead.
He was a very rich man, and in his will he left everything to his son, who was just growing up, further stipulating that if his son should die without legitimate issue, his estate should go to Mona Giovanna, to whom he had always been deeply devoted.
Very important. He's in his will is going to write that everything is going to go, when he dies, everything will go to his little kid. And consequently, when the kid dies, everything is going to go to Mona Giovanna. Going back to Great Gatsby.
So when the kid dies, everything goes to Mona.
Going back to Gatsby, Gatsby did all of the things that he do, while Daisy was married and also had a kid. In this case, he had a little girl. And the husband of Daisy was a very rich man. Same thing with the husband of Mona Giovanna, very rich man. Okay. Go ahead.
Shortly afterward, he died, leaving Mona Giovanna a widow. And every summer, in accordance with Florentine custom, she went away with her son to a country estate of theirs, which was very near Federigo's farm. Consequently, this young lad of hers happened to become friendly with Federigo.
So, the guy dies, she goes away, she moves to a place, she goes close to a place next to the farm of Federigo, and the son of Mona Giovanna happened to have a good bond, a good relationship with Federigo, the kid. Right?
Acquiring a passion for birds and dogs, and having often seen Federigo's falcon in flight, he became fascinated by it and longed to own it. But since he could see that Federigo was deeply attached to the bird, he never ventured to ask him for it.
The kid is going to fall in love with the falcon. And the kid is like, wow, I would love to have that falcon. However, he respected Federigo and he never asked Federigo for the falcon. Go ahead.
And there the matter rested, when to the consternation of his mother, the boy happened to be taken ill.
Now we have the little boy is very ill. Being her only child.
Being her only child, he was the apple of his mother's eye, and she sat beside his bed the whole day long, never ceasing to comfort him. Every so often she asked him whether there was anything he wanted, imploring him to tell her what it was, because if it was possible to acquire it, she would move heaven and earth to obtain it for him.
So the mother is going to tell the little kid, I know you're very ill. Ask whatever you want, and I will move the earth if I need to do so to get it for you. Go ahead.
After hearing this offer repeated for the uptenth time, the boy said, Mother, if you could arrange for me to have Federigo's falcon, I believe I should soon get better.
So the guy, the little kid, little spoiled kid, is going to say, well, Mom, since you insist, I know that if I have the chance of having Federigo's falcon, I'm going to get better. What do you think the mother is going to do?
Get the falcon.
Do you think it will be difficult for her to get the
No,
falcon?
because she's going to seduce Federigo and get the love.
If she goes and asks for the falcon, Federigo is going to say, here it is. Easy. Go ahead.
On hearing this request, the lady was somewhat taken aback, and began to consider what she could do about it. Knowing that Federigo had been in love with her for a long time, and that she had never designed to cast so much as a single glance in his direction, she said to herself, how can I possibly go to him or even send anyone to ask him for this falcon, to which to judge from all I have heard is the finest that ever flew, as well as being the only thing that keeps him alive. And how can I be so heartless as to deprive so noble a man of his one remaining pleasure?
So at least Mona Giovanna is thinking, wow, how can I go to this man who has been always in love with me and just go and tell him, I need your falcon. How can I take the most precious thing from this guy? So in some case, she's being what? She's having compassion. She's having pity for the poor guy. Go ahead.
Her mind filled with reflections of this sort, she remained silent, not knowing what answer to make to her son's request, even though she was quite certain that the falcon was hers for the asking. At length, however, her maternal instincts gained the upper hand, and she resolved, come what may, to satisfy the child by going in person to Federigo to collect the bird, and bring it back to him. And so she replied, bear up, my son, and see whether you can start feeling any better. I give you my word that I shall go and fetch it for you first thing tomorrow morning.
So she says, you know what? I hope you get well. I'm going to do whatever it is to get that falcon. Okay? So let's see what's going to happen. Go ahead.
Next morning, taking another lady with her for company, his mother left the house as though intending to go for a walk, made her way to Federigo's little cottage, and asked to see him. For several days, the weather had been unsuitable for hawking, so Federigo was attending to one or two little jobs in his garden. when he heard to his utter astonishment that Mona Giovanna was at the front door and wished to speak to him, he happily rushed there to greet her.
What do you think will be the feelings of poor Federigo when he realized that Mona Giovanna was right there at the door?
He would believe that it was because of him.
Probably. But what do you think will be the emotion right now, Federigo, knowing
Excited.
that the woman he loves is right there, knocking, hopeful, shocked because he will never think that she will be right there at his door, excited, nervous. Go ahead.
When she saw him coming, she advanced with womanly grace to meet him. Federigo received her with a deep bow, whereupon she said, "Greetings, Federigo." Then she continued, "I have come to make amends for the harm you have suffered on my account, by loving me more than you ought to have done. As a token of my esteem, I should like to take breakfast with you this morning, together with my companion here, but you must not put yourself to any trouble."
So she just goes there and says, well, we can have breakfast and have a little chit chat. All right.
"My lady," replied Federigo in all humility, "I cannot recall ever having suffered any harm on your account. On the contrary, I have gained so much that if ever I attained any kind of excellence, it was entirely because of your own great worth and the love I bore you."
This guy is broke, poor, and he still speaks highly about this woman. Go ahead.
"Moreover, I can assure you that this visit which you have been generous enough to pay me is worth more to me than all the money I ever possessed, though I fear that my hospitality will not amount to very much."
This is a high character guy. High character guy. A guy that has lost everything, but he continues to be a gentleman. Go ahead.
So saying, he led her unassumingly into the house, and thence into his garden, where, since there was no one else he could call upon to chaperon her, he said, "My lady, as there is nobody else available, this good woman, who is the wife of the farmer here, will keep you company whilst I go and see about setting the table." Though his poverty was acute, the extent to which he had squandered his wealth had not yet been fully borne home to Federigo. But on this particular morning, finding that he had nothing to set before the lady for whose love he had entertained so lavishly in the past, his eyes were well and truly open to the fact. Distressed beyond all measure, he silently cursed his bad luck and rushed all over the house like one possessed.
So this guy is like, I can't believe I don't have nothing to give this woman. Go ahead.
But could find no trace of either money or valuables. By now, the morning was well advanced. He was still determined to entertain the gentlewoman to some sort of meal, and not wishing to beg assistance from his own farmer. His gaze alighted on his precious falcon, which was sitting on its perch in the little room where it was kept.
What happened? He's looking at what?
At the falcon.
Why do you think he's looking at the falcon?
It's the only thing he has of value.
The only thing that he has is the little falcon. Go ahead.
And having discovered on picking it up that it was nice and plump,
Nice and plump, that it was well fed, it was fat.
he decided that since he had nowhere else to turn, it would make a worthy dish for such a lady as this.
So what are they gonna do with the falcon? They're gonna cook the falcon. He doesn't have anything to give it, so he's gonna use the falcon. He says, well, I'm gonna make a sacrifice here. Go ahead.
So without thinking twice about it, he wrung the bird's neck and promptly handed it over to his housekeeper to be plucked, dressed, and roasted carefully on a spit. Then he covered the table with spotless linen, of which he still had a certain amount in his possession, and returned in high spirits to the garden, where he announced to his lady that the meal, such as he had been able to prepare, was now ready.
So our falcon is dead, and our falcon will be served as a meal for Mona Giovanna. Right.
The lady and her companion rose from where they were sitting and made their way to the table. And together with Federigo, who waited on them with the utmost deference, they made a meal of the prize falcon without knowing what they were eating.
He never said that they were eating the falcon. He kept it shut. We'll eat it, no problem, but I'm not saying anything. Go ahead. And what was the purpose of Mona Giovanna going there? Well, he gave her the falcon. Let's see. Go.
On leaving the table, they engaged their host in pleasant conversation for a while, and when the lady thought it time to broach the subject she had gone there to discuss, she turned to Federigo and addressed him affably as follows. I do not doubt for a moment, Federigo, that you will be astonished at my impertinence when you discover my principal reason for coming here, especially when you recall your former mode of living and my virtue, which you possibly mistook for harshness and cruelty. But if you had ever had any children to make you appreciate the power of paternal love, I should think it certain that you would to some extent forgive me. However, the fact that you have no children of your own does not exempt me, a mother, from the laws common to all other mothers, and being bound to obey those laws. I am forced, contrary to my own wishes and to all the rules of decorum and property, to ask you for something to which I know you are very deeply attached.
So now here it comes. Right.
Which is only natural, seeing that it is the only consolation, the only pleasure, the only recreation remaining to you in your present extremity of fortune. The gift I am seeking is your falcon, to which my son has taken so powerful a liking, that if I fail to take it to him, I fear he will succumb to the illness from which he is suffering, and consequently I shall lose him. In imploring you to give me this falcon, I appeal not to your love, for you are under no obligation to me on that account, but rather to your noble heart, whereby you have proved yourself superior to all others in the practice of courtesy. Do me this favor, then, so that I may claim that through your generosity I have saved my son's life, thus placing him forever in your debt. When he heard what it was that she wanted and realized that he could not oblige her because he had given her the falcon to eat, Federigo burst into tears in her presence before being able to utter a single word in reply.
Poor guy started crying. Right.
At first, the lady thought his tears stemmed more from his grief at having to part with his fine falcon.
She's right now thinking, oh, this what I have done, asking for the falcon, and that's the thing that he mostly loves. But she doesn't know what happened with falcon. Right.
Than from any other motive, and was on the point of telling him that she would prefer not to have it, but on second thoughts she said nothing, and waited for Federigo to stop crying and give her his answer, which eventually he did. My lady, he said, ever since God decreed that you should become the object of my love, I have repeatedly had cause to complain of fortune's hostility towards me. But all her previous blows were slight by comparison with the one she has dealt me now. Nor shall I ever be able to forgive her, when I reflect that you have come to my poor dwelling, which you never deigned to visit when it was rich, and that you desire from me a trifling favor which she has made it impossible for me to concede. The reason is simple, and I shall explain it in a few words.
Now he's going to explain everything in detail. Go ahead.
When you did me the kindness of telling me that you wished to breakfast with me, I considered it right and proper, having regard to your excellence and merit, to do everything within my power to prepare a most sumptuous dish than those I would offer to my ordinary guest. My thoughts therefore turned to the falcon you have asked me for, and knowing its quality, I reputed it a worthy dish to set before you. So I had it roasted and served to you on the trencher this morning, and I could not have wished for a better way of disposing of it. But now that I discovered that you wanted it in a different form, I am so distressed by my inability to grant you your request that I shall never forgive myself for as long as I live. In confirmation of his words, Federigo caused the feathers, talons, and beak to be cast on the table before her. On seeing and hearing all this, the lady reproached him at first for killing so fine a falcon and serving it up for a woman to eat. But then she became lost in admiration for his magnanimity of spirit, which no amount of poverty had managed to diminish nor ever would. But now that her hopes of obtaining the falcon had vanished, she began to feel seriously concerned for the health of her son.
She's right now astonished of the act of Federigo. She loved the act of Federigo, but after thinking about that, she went back to thinking about her son and what I'm going to do now.
And after thanking Federigo for his hospitality and good intentions, she took her leave of him, looking all despondent, and returned to the child and to his mother's indescribable sorrow within the space of a few days, whether though his disappointment in not being able to have the falcon, or because he was in any case suffering from a mortal illness. The child passed from this life.
So the child died.
After a period of bitter mourning and continued weeping, the lady was repeatedly urged by her brothers to remarry, since not only had she been left a vast fortune, but she was still a young woman.
So the brothers are pushing him to, you're young, so you can remarry again. Go ahead. Mona Giovanna.
And though she would have preferred to remain a widow, they gave her so little peace that in the end, recalling Federigo's high merits and his latest act of generosity, namely to have killed such a fine falcon in her honor, she said to her brothers, "If only it were pleasing to you, I should willingly remain as I am. But since you are so eager for me to take a husband, you may be certain that I shall never marry any other man except Federigo Delgi Alberighi." Her brothers made fun of her, saying, "Silly girl, don't talk such nonsense. How can you marry a man who hasn't a penny with which to bless himself?"
And look at the fascinating answer that she will give them. Go
"My
ahead.
brothers," she replied, "I am well aware of that, but I would sooner have a gentleman without riches than riches without a gentleman."
In other words, it's better to have a gentleman without riches than riches without a gentleman. Go ahead.
Seeing that her mind was made up, and knowing Federigo to be a gentleman of great merit, even though he was poor, her brothers fell in with her wishes and handed her over to him.
So the brothers agreed. Right.
Along with her immense fortune, thenceforth, finding himself married to this great lady with whom he was so deeply in love, and very rich into the bargain, Federigo managed his affairs more prudently and lived with her in happiness to the end of his days.
So Federigo and Mona Giovanna are going to live together, married, and in love for the rest of their days. So in other words, this is a story of sacrifice. Sacrifice by whom? Federigo. So guy starts rich, gets poor, ends up rich. High, low, and high again. So basically that's it for Giovanni Boccaccio's Federigo's Falcon. Thank you.